everyone, good afternoon. As the guy just said, my name's Luke. I work for London Stock Exchange, and the area I focus on is sustainability. Turns out, actually quite by chance really, that turned out to be quite a good career choice because sustainability has suddenly got really big. I was just listening from behind the curtain there, Stephen talking, and there's a few themes that we'll talk about and carry on where there's a lot of crossover. So just for the purpose of today, so everyone is, I guess, clear and on the same page, when I'm talking about sustainability, I'm not just talking climate. The environmental side absolutely is a huge part of sustainability. You know, carbon emissions, renewable energy, the green economy, recycling, all of that side. But then, as Stephen just mentioned just now, the social side is also just as big, and it's a really wide sort of sphere of things we talk about, from diversity and inclusion to financial inclusion, access to health, all different bits. Modern slavery, financial crime. So the S, the social part of sustainability, just as big. And what's been quite interesting, I think, and where sustainability has really started to evolve and move on and mature really in the last few years is where you'd group together environment and you group together social and you sort of say this is sustainability or CSR as it used to be called. They sort of ran in parallel a bit now. Now we're actually starting to see there really are big crossovers between all of those different aspects of sustainability. And when they start to cross over, they become a bit of a force multiplier. So I'll digress a bit. We've got plenty of time. The thing that really interests me, and I think the thing that's going to become the biggest part of sustainability is basically what's the social impact of climate change. That's the big piece. And I was talking to someone just before this about health, and that's quite an interesting one if you take that as an example. So health, you start to think, okay, so climate change is happening, the world is warming up, we're going to have loads more extreme weather. What's the direct impact that can have on our health? You start saying, well, some of them could be really direct, like we're going to be living in a warmer world potentially. So how do our bodies react? How do they adapt just living more consistently in a hot environment? Or we might find that our bodies are in water scarce regions. So how do we react to just having more prolonged periods of water scarcity? So that's the first sort of direct impact. Other direct impacts will be if you, again, this extreme weather and all these type of things happen, what happens to biodiversity? And what happens when we start to lose biodiversity? And you start to think, well, okay, one, we're going to struggle perhaps to feed ourselves as well because we don't have as much biodiversity there to grow things and eat it. We might struggle as well to sort of shelter ourselves, certainly in the more underdeveloped nations where we just have less resource to build things around us and live in. And we also might struggle to protect ourselves through things like medicines. So you start to get these very direct influences of climate change on health. And then you start to get the indirect ones. So if you start to get areas of the world that get really, really hot and they become uninhabitable, well, then it starts to cause forced migration to other areas. And if you get forced migration, then you start to get overcrowding. And if you get overcrowding, then you start to think, well, actually, things like disease, they start to spread easier or they transmit quicker. We might have more pandemics, perhaps, like we are in now. So you can see that this is where the sustainability debate is going. The E and the S of ESG are really starting to come together and you're starting to get those tangible bits. Anyway, I did say I digressed. What I was actually was going to speak to you today about is what is the business impact then? What's the business case for sustainability? And the whole point of that little thing there is that the business case for sustainability is it's becoming unignorable. It's too big, it's too broad. And so what I've tried to do to make it easier and easier to remember is I think there are 5 aspects to what your business case for sustainability is. And that's people. I've named them all with P, so it's easy to remember, mainly for me. People, purpose, practices, partners, and I said it's easier to remember. I can't remember what the last one is. Performance, right? People, purpose, practices, partners, performance. So let's start with people. And I know some people don't like to talk about generations in terms of Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, baby boomers, whatever it is. But for the purposes of this, it's quite useful, right? And the whole point is millennials and Gen Z. I think it's actually got corrected. I think it's meant to be Gen Z, but I can't say it, so I'm going to keep going with Gen Z. Millennials and Gen Zers, they are now forming, as we know, the main bulk of our workforces. And millennials were the real game changers, to be perfectly honest, because that was the first demographic that really cared about the purpose of a business, what it stood for, what its values are or were, and also things like what's its environmental commitments. And if you start to look at why millennials join businesses, they really do now look at sustainability as a core reason why they're doing it. And then Gen Zers, they've taken it one step further. You know, alcohol, cars, meat, all of this sort of, it's all off the menu, right? And they're actually now probably the least racist, the least sexist, the most culturally diverse, the most environmentally aware demographic we've had yet. So the point here really is, now that Gen Z and millennials, and Gen Z, by the way, will start outstripping millennials in terms of purchasing power in about 10 years, by 2030, with them now the center of gravity in an organization, sustainability really, really matters because it matters to them. And so if you don't have some kind of sustainability-linked part of your purpose as a business, it doesn't have to be the only thing you do, but you've got to have a nod to it or a realization of it, then you do run the risk, you start to run the risk of becoming irrelevant. And if you think of consumer brands particularly, you think how quickly that's changed and what people want. You look at the pandemic at the moment, things like people are wanting to, buy local, buy ethical. Electric cars are becoming mainstream. We're starting to really think about how we heat our houses or how we light our houses. We're starting to think about where we invest our money. So another segue, just to give you an idea of how you link your purpose to sustainability. For London Stock Exchange, it's financial markets. So we are a convener, if you like, of financial markets. We help mobilize financial markets. We help provide that sort of the platform and the data that enables businesses to raise money or investors to decide, actually, we want to look at sustainability type metrics rather than just pure financial performance. So that's what we do. So we play a small part in that, but really what we help do is provide capital to sustainable economies or sustainable businesses or sustainable projects. And so that's called sustainable finance. So that's the bit that we play. And then that becomes quite exciting to people who are in financial markets or data. I think, actually, you know what, we can start to make a difference. So the purpose bit's becoming really important. And the crucial bit here is it has to be defensible. You can't just say, hey, we're sustainable and that's it. It has to be really defensible, it has to be robust, and it has to stand up to scrutiny, because social media particularly means that there's no real hiding place anymore. It's quickly spotted if you say, hey, we have all these progressive values and this is what we're doing with sustainability, and then you don't live up to it. So the purpose is important. And to go back to the people bit then, what you're really saying is it's now going to directly impact your ability to attract the best talent to the business. We're saying a lot of that now is millennials, Gen Z. This matters to them. If you don't have a purpose, you might not be able to hire the same caliber of people as you had before. Because if they make two decisions, the number one thing's still going to be who do we work for and how much does it pay. But I reckon the second thing now, and we're starting to see it within our own recruitment processes, how sustainable are you? What's your policy when it comes to environmental emissions? What's your policy when it comes to D&I? We're getting asked that a lot. And when I start to join the onboarding process and the induction process, lots of people come to that session, not because I'm good, they don't really care about me, it's because this is what they're interested in. So it directly impacts your ability to attract the best talent. And then you've got to retain that talent. So you have to be aware that the sustainability landscape is shifting quickly. Again, when I talked at the beginning about health or environment and all that sort of thing, we weren't talking about this a few years ago. And in fact, 2 years ago, I couldn't do anything like this, anything about sustainability, without being able to have to talk about single-use plastics. It was the biggest thing. Single-use plastics, what are we doing? What are we doing with recycling? And honestly, I could have in those induction things, it could be a 30-minute session, and 20 minutes would be about recycling bins, or what are we doing with the tops of the big biros, and shouldn't we not have that? So it was all single-use plastic. Then pandemic, COVID. Single-use plastic wasn't talked about quite as much then. Now it's suddenly health, it's well-being, it's mental well-being, it's isolation. These are the big issues for employees. Then bam, then you have Black Lives Matter, George Floyd. Suddenly, we're talking once again about diversity inclusion. And so these things shift really quickly. So your business, you have to have the ability to spot trends where you can, and when things happen that you can't have possibly predicted, like the pandemic, you have to have the ability to embed that within who you are, what you stand for, and what you do. So if you start then to think, okay, we need to have purpose, we need to be able to attract and retain the best talent, and we need to sort of start thinking about how do we prioritize what's the most material things on the agenda for our employees. But it doesn't stop there. Practices, the third one, this is actually regulation. This is what you do in response to regulation. And you have to not only be aware of what's material to your employees, you have to be material to what the regulators are. Because there is going to be a massive increase, and they're already starting to see it, in sustainability-related regulation. So what you do, how you embed it within your operations, how you report on it, how you disclose on it, it's going to start, if the regulators come down, if you don't do these things, it's going to impact your ability to do business. And of course, it doesn't stop there either, because you also need to think about what's most material and what's top of the priority list for our customers. And again, our team, the sustainability team, if you thought a few years ago, the sales team might come to us every now and again, they say, we're in the process of getting a deal here, there's an RFP out, could you just answer a couple of questions on CSR? Sure, no problem at all. Well, one, we don't call it CSR anymore, and there's a reason for that. And two, those 2 questions are now turning into 2 pages of questions. And so if we and my team haven't done our job to make sure that, in our case, the London Stock Exchange is a responsible, sustainable business that has the right targets, the right reporting, the right commitments, the right ambition, they're going to lose that business. And whereas before that might have even been sort of smiled at, like, not really, but now it genuinely is. They'll say, if you haven't got these things, you almost don't get to the next stage. So it impacts your ability to do businesses. But that goes the other way as well. And partners is the other end of your value chain, if you like, not your customers, but your suppliers. So we need to make sure that we and all businesses are doing business with the right type of partners. Because if you can have your own house in order, but if those partners don't, and they start to provide a weak link within your supply chain, if those partners are exposed and vulnerable to climate risks or social risks, then that has kickback, and again, on your ability to do business, because you are only as strong as the weakest link in your chain. And reputationally as well, there's a big impact there with partners, because again, if you think, right, we've done all the things we've just spoken about, we have this great purpose, we have a sustainability thread to it, we're showing our green credentials, we're showing our social equity credentials, whatever it is you've decided to focus on, and then you find, however distant and not particularly well linked, but in your supply chain you have suppliers who have human rights or modern slavery questions over them, or they start heavy misuse of fossil fuels within them. It goes back to the other bit about reputation, social media, the blowback on that, you're not living your values. So you have to be really conscious across all of your all of your value chain, upstream and downstream, who you partner with. And then the last one of the 5 Ps was performance. And this is simply how efficient you are with the resources in your control. So this really is just bottom line maths. You think about things like energy or water, they are going to become and are becoming more scarce. I mean, we've all seen the energy situation at the moment, prices, whether that's gas prices, petrol availability, things are becoming more scarce. And if things become more scarce, they become more expensive. And so the more efficient you are, take away out it's good for the environment and emissions, but the more efficient you are with those resources, the better. Because you're going to protect your bottom line, you're going to use less stuff, and quite frankly, it just makes business sense. So that's just maths. Just be better. Oh, and the other thing, by the way, would be things like recycling. That's the other way. You're recycling. You're only going to get more and more and more of this stuff if you grow as a business, stuff that you need to get rid of. And so recycling will go up in price as well. So they're your 5 Ps, right? If you take them collectively, they show you the breadth and the depth and the scope of the type of things that influence commercial decisions within a business. And I'd say the takeaway for it is that sustainability, look, it's no longer something on the side of the desk anymore. It can't just be something you add on. CSR for me always felt like a bit of an add-on, really. Here's what the business is doing, and oh yeah, we're okay, we're pretty responsible, and we're doing some good stuff. That doesn't work anymore. It has to be embedded within your business, has to be embedded within the strategy of what you do. And actually, even though some of the skills for sustainability are quite generalist, you need to have the ability to communicate, for example. There's some specialist stuff in there as well. I'd say it's as nuanced as it is technical. You know, it is how we're going to engage people, how we can get hearts and minds around this to support what we're doing, just as what's our greenhouse gas emissions data and how we're going to report on that. So there are different aspects to this. So you can't do it off the side of the desk. You do need to bring in expertise or develop in-house expertise, and you need to be really, really thoughtful with how you communicate it, how you engage your employees with it, and go back to that word again. Everything you do when it comes to reporting needs to be transparent, needs to be defensible. You need to outline your ambitions. This is what we want to do and where we want to go. And you can say, these are the great things we've done. Oh, and by the way, here's the stuff we still need to do. Here's the journey we're going on. So I think now sustainability has really got to the top table, if you like. And it can be and will be a real strategic driver towards business growth. And so I think, and I'll end on that, I think that's a really great place to be. And I think that shows we've made some great progress. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Luke. Okay, we've had lots of questions come through. Anybody question? Anybody got a question from the floor before we start? No, excellent. Okay, right, let's move on. Some of these are very broad. Is sustainability the future of financial services?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Moving on. No, sorry.
Yeah, no, it is. So I touched on it earlier in terms of sort of the LSEG role. I think what we're seeing is a real maturity. If you think about what you used to have, if you think, I'm going to invest in you and your business, you've just done a business, you'd look at all the normal things like, you know, how profitable is it, what's the turnover, and et cetera, et cetera. Have you got a long-term future? That just doesn't wash anymore. What you might have done previously is said, okay, let's do a bit of what they call negative screening. Are you involved in tobacco? Yes, no. Are you involved in arms? Yes, no. Is it porn? Whatever it is, right? Yes, no. These things that we think are socially or environmentally irresponsible. But it's just got so much more sophisticated than that now. You have to screen all of these different aspects and say, we want to not only know what you're doing in terms of financial, but what's your impact on the planet, socially, environmentally. And that bit, I mean, I've spoken to a couple of people out there in terms of ESG data to enable investors, for example, to have that at their fingertips. It's a massive, massive market. So it's not normal plus sustainability anymore. It's now embedded within the process.
You talked about ESG investors there. I mean, how significant do you think that is going to be for organisations now? Because they really have to make sure that they do have those credentials.
Yeah, I think it's mainstream now. I think that's the simple answer. I think it's BAU, and it's not a case of, yeah, that's it. It's mainstream. It's there. It's significant enough to mean everybody now has to consider it.
Okay, and LSEG is the first global exchange to commit to net zero. What are the key elements in that pledge?
So net zero is quite an interesting one, and it gets a little bit technical because you've got carbon neutral, you've got net zero. So carbon neutral, this is the simplistic terms, and by the way, net zero is still being defined in the broader world, if you like, by things like the Science-Based Target Initiative. They're still defining what net zero is, but broadly, you're saying to yourself, the first stage is, are our operations carbon neutral? And there are multiple things. You have to reduce your emissions. You have to say, you were talking about that efficiency play. Let's reduce our emissions. And you have targets over 10 years, 20 years, whatever, to reduce those. And then you start to say there's always going to be like a bit that you can't get to. There is an environmental cost of doing business, and that will be, traveling and heating and lighting and those sort of things. So then what do you do with that? Well, one of the things you want to look at is can we, across all of our estate, switch to renewable energy? Yes, and we've done that, but there are multiple ways you can do that. And then the other bit where you say we just can't get to that, then how do you offset? And then none of these things can be done in isolation. You have to do them all together. You have to reduce your emissions, you have to purchase renewables, you have to offset what you can't do. And over time, the mix of that changes. And even things like the type of offsets are changing. Historically, you'd look at things where actually you make sure you effectively just take out the same as you've put into the environment. But now you're starting to invest in technology, for example, that actively takes carbon out of the environment. So you need to change the mix of how you offset and the type of things you procure. So as I say, it does get a little bit complex, but that's exactly the sort of initiative that employees love. They like the big ones where you say, you know, we're going to commit to carbon emission targets or D&I targets, but also they really love the ones they're most engaged in, the ones that they can impact themselves. So it will be things like, well, actually, what are our travel targets? Because I can choose to travel less, or recycling, or on the social side, volunteering. How do I get involved and use my expertise elsewhere?
Now, at the beginning of the show, when I was introducing everybody in the introduction, I was talking about London and its role as a financial services hub and centre, and how that could be impacted by various forces, Brexit, COVID, new technology. We're on the eve of COP26 happening. How important is it, do you think, that the UK is seen as a leader in sustainability, and how is that good for business, specifically for the UK, but globally?
Well, I think the UK is finding its place in a post-Brexit world. And at the beginning, I said, you know, sustainability is my career focus, and that's, as it happens, was a decent choice, right, or lucky choice probably, because it's blowing up. I think if you were to create, okay, we're now a nation, we're creating a new nation, and we're going to say, what are we going to focus on? Then if you didn't have sustainability in one of your top 3 things of we want to be a world leader in this, you'd be stupid, right? So this is actually an amazing opportunity to say we're recasting what the UK looks like, the role it plays, and it's got to play a role in sustainability. And the obvious place to start there, I mentioned it before, is sustainable finance, because finance is, you know, one of the UK's premium outputs and exports, if you like. So the ability to say, well, we want to influence behaviour on where capital goes into, effectively, what you want to say, we want to get capital and redirect it towards the green economy, the blue economy, and invest in all of that innovation to make sure that, you know, we as a world can survive, then it's got a huge part to play. And regardless of Brexit and all the, you know, implications of that, London still remains a massive financial centre, for example. And if you're going to say what are our key credentials going to be when it comes to financial centre, sustainability and sustainable finance has to be top, I think.
Okay. Oh, yes, I was going to say any questions. Yes, definitely. Could bring the mic out, please? If you can just state your name and organisation, please, that'd be great.
Hello.
Hiya.
Oh, blimey. My name's Sophie Cowan. I'm from switchit.money, and wanted to ask, you've talked about new employee pressure on organisations moving towards sustainable practice. What's the role of sort of consumer and customer pressure on financial institutions to speed up the process? So do you see something that the average person can do to influence these decisions?
Yeah, well, great question. And actually, your question articulates something that I don't know if I did or didn't, but it's the pressure's coming from everywhere at the moment. That's what makes sustainability so broad. Yeah, I think, look, I mentioned millennials, and millennials look particularly at, I'm sorry if people hate millennials. I got told off about it at work the other day. People, they said, they don't like being called millennials. I said, yeah, but I'm trying to make a point. Where you invest your money is actually quite important. It's actually really important. And so if you look at, if you look at things like your pension or your savings or ISA, if you have things like that, what you're trying to find, I use Nutmeg, that's what I've used, and I don't have loads put away. I start to put into, you know, into stocks and shares ISA or something like that. And they now have a sliding scale that sort of says, how sustainable do you want your investment to be? And you can pick between 0 and 10. It really is that simple. And actually, you know that if you go 10, actually, well, I say, you might not get quite the returns on if you go naught. But even that's changing. So actually, they're starting to see more and more proof emerging that if you have where you invest your money and it's in a sustainably strong, basket of whatever you have in investment, then actually start to outperform. So to answer your question, I think it's just got to put more and more pressure on where's this money going, where's it being invested. Yes, I want a return, but what's it also doing for the world and sustainability? And I think it's just happening, just because, and pensions, if you get your pension at work, ask which pension pot it is. If you can switch between it, you'll probably find now, in bigger organisations definitely, there is a green, sustainable, ESG-linked pot, so stick it in there. Put that money to good work.
One more question, and then we will have to leave it there. So final question of this session, please.
Hi, thanks for being the last question. My name's Freya Wordsworth, and I'm from the Regional Investment Service. And it's actually leading on quite well from your question, and it was really just asking whether you think there's any value or credibility in the impact marks that are being introduced for investors. So
the what? Sorry, I didn't hear that.
The impact marks. So I think there's some introductions of these impact marks to kind of give you a mark if you are being impactful for your investments. And I'm just wondering whether we could either regulate them or make them have a specific standard, so as investors you can meet that standard and work towards that.
Yeah, look, I think anything that starts to put a standard on or starts to give some visibility or credibility to the choices you make that are sustainable choices, I think is really important. So again, London Stock Exchange, we have something called the Green Economy Mark. So you can start to see of those businesses listed on the exchange, which have a sort of sustainability-linked leanings, if you like. So I think it's all important. What we're finding now, and actually what the sustainability in general is crying out for, is a sort of a consolidation to say, what's the main way of measuring this? What's the main framework we should commit to make sure that what we're doing as a business is appropriate and market leading? Because they're kind of popping up all over the place. But there's also part of me that thinks if they're popping up all over the place, it just keeps putting on that sort of pressure, but just in a different place. And as long as it's credible and robust and defensible and all those things I said before, then I'm all in favour.
Okay, thank you for your questions. Thank you for another great session. Luke.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Luke.